She humiliated a farmer in front of an entire credit union because his boots were still muddy from the field, and she did not care who was watching. Adaeze had worked at Northern Harvest Credit Union in Barrie, Ontario for 3 years, and in those 3 years she had decided, quietly, firmly, without anyone telling her directly, that she was better than the people who walked through the front doors in work clothes. The credit union sat on a corner of Dunlop Street, glass-fronted and clean, the kind of place where the staff wore lanyards and spoke in measured tones. Adaeze wore her lanyard like a medal. She kept her nails done. She pressed her blazer every morning before her shift. When she sat behind her desk, she held herself the way she imagined people held themselves in downtown Toronto banks, upright, a little distant, professionally unavailable. She was good at her job, technically. Forms were filed correctly, numbers balanced. She never made mistakes with the accounts. But there was something underneath her efficiency, a sharpness, a way of sizing people up the moment they stepped inside, that her colleague Zara had noticed on Adaze's very first week and never quite stopped watching. Zara worked the desk beside hers. She was the kind of woman who remembered the names of members' children without writing them down. She brought in jollof rice on Fridays and left it in the break room with a little handwritten note. She had been at Northern Harvest for 7 years and had never once made a member feel small. They were not enemies, Adaeze and Zara. They were something more uncomfortable than that. Two people who shared the same workspace, smiled at the psalmist tunes, and understood each other completely without ever saying so. It was a Wednesday in late October when Mr. Kofi walked in. The bell above the door rang at 2:17 in the afternoon. Adaeze knew the time because she had just checked her phone under the desk, waiting for the last 40 minutes of her shift to pass. She looked up from habit, and she saw him. He was somewhere in his 60s, short and broad-shouldered, wearing a quilted vest over a flannel shirt. His jeans had dirt on the knees, real dirt, not the decorative kind. His work boots left faint prints on the mat near the entrance. He had a wool cap in his hand that he was turning in his fingers, and he walked to the front of the line without hurrying, the way a man walks who is not in a rush because he has spent his whole life doing hard things and learned that rushing does not change them. He came to Adaze's window. "Good afternoon," he said. His accent was Ghanaian, warm, unhurried. "I was hoping to speak with someone about opening a business account. I have some questions." Adaeze looked at him. She looked at his boots. She looked at the dirt on his knees. "A business account," she repeated. "Yes." He nodded. "I have been a personal member here for some time. I wanted to ask about the requirements for the commercial side." Adaeze pulled up the general information page on her screen. She did not look at his membership. She did not pull up his file. She glanced at the screen the way you glance at something you have already decided is irrelevant, and then she looked back at him. "Business accounts have a minimum operating deposit," she said. "It's not a small amount. For agricultural businesses especially, we'd need proof of revenue, operating history, tax filings. The full package. It's a significant process." She said significant process, the way someone says it when they mean, this is probably not for you. Mr. Kofi tilted his head slightly. "I understand. I have all of that. I have been operating for over 20 years. I just had some questions about the fee structure and whether there were any cooperative rates for." "I'm going to be honest with you," Adaeze said, and the branch went a little quiet the way places do when someone's voice shifts into a register that is too sharp for the room. "Our commercial accounts are designed for established businesses with consistent cash flow. If you're just starting out or working seasonally, it might not be the right fit. There are other institutions that might be more appropriate." She had not looked at his file. She had not asked his name. She had not asked anything at all. Mr. Kofi was quiet for a moment. He set his wool cap down on the counter very gently. He said, "I see. I can give you a pamphlet with the general requirements," Adaeze continued, already reaching for the rack. "But honestly, the process takes months, and the fees are." "Adaeze." Zara's voice came from the next desk. "Quiet, just the one word." Adaeze turned. Zara was looking at her with an expression that was not anger. It was worse than anger. It was the look of someone who has been watching and waiting and has finally seen enough. "Can I help this gentleman?" Zara said. Adaeze felt the shift in the room. 2 other members had looked up from the waiting chairs. The young man at the end of the counter, a teller named Brendan, who was 22 and had only been there 4 months, was staring at his keyboard. "I was helping him," Adaeze said. "You were discouraging him," Zara said, still quietly. "There's a difference." The air held still. Mr. Kofi looked between the 2 women. He did not look embarrassed. He looked, if anything, patient, the patience of someone who has encountered this before and decided long ago that it said more about the room than about him. "I don't want to cause any trouble," he said. "You haven't caused anything," Zara said. She was already standing, already pulling up a chair beside her desk. "Please, come and sit down. Let me pull up your membership and we'll look at everything together." Adaeze watched Mr. Kofi walk to Zara's desk. She turned back to her own screen. Her face was composed. Her hands were still. But something had shifted. A small, unpleasant thing. And she could feel it sitting in her chest, like a stone that was not quite heavy enough to be a problem yet. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself Zara was overreacting. She told herself the man in the muddy boots almost certainly did not have the financials for a commercial account, and that she had simply been realistic, and that being realistic was not the same as being cruel. She told herself this for the rest of her shift. It took Zara 45 minutes with Mr. Kofi. When he stood to leave, he shook her hand with both of his and said something that made Zara laugh, a real laugh, surprised out of her. Adaeze did not hear what he said. She was not trying to hear. He nodded once in Adaze's direction as he passed. Not coldly, not with any pointed feeling. Just a nod, the kind you give when you leave a room. She nodded back. The branch returned to its ordinary afternoon rhythm. Adaeze finished her shift, collected her things, and drove home on the 400 in the slow crawl of Barry traffic, listening to nothing. She did not think about Mr. Kofi, or she tried not to. The thing about trying not to think about something is that the trying is its own kind of thinking. By the time she pulled into her parking space at her apartment building on Essa Road, she had replayed the interaction 4 times, and 4 times it had looked exactly the way she wanted it to look, realistic. Professional, efficient. She believed this. She almost believed this. 2 weeks passed. Then one evening in mid-November, Adaeze was sitting on her couch with a bowl of rice she had barely touched, watching the local Barry news because she had run out of things to watch and had not yet decided what she actually wanted. The segment was about agricultural investment in Simcoe County, grants, cooperatives, something about diversification of the local food supply. She was not really watching. She was looking at her phone. She looked up at the moment they cut to an interview. The man on the screen was standing in front of a greenhouse the size of an aircraft hangar. Behind him, through the glass, rows upon rows of green. Tomatoes, peppers, things that grew in straight lines under careful light. The interviewer was speaking. The chyron at the bottom of the screen said, "Kofi Asante Mensah, founder, Asante Farms, Ontario's largest, independently owned greenhouse." Adaze's bowl of rice went cold in her hands. She sat up. She looked at the man on the screen, the broad shoulders, the unhurried way he spoke, the flannel shirt. Different flannel, but the same quality of flannel. The kind of shirt worn by someone who works in the actual world and does not think about shirts. The interviewer asked about expansion plans. Mr. Kofi, Mr. Asante Mensah, smiled and said that they were in the process of establishing a cooperative banking relationship to support the next phase of growth, which would include 3 additional facilities and 28 new permanent jobs. He mentioned, without naming names, that they had recently chosen to move their commercial accounts from one institution to another. "We found a financial partner who actually wanted to understand what we do," he said. The interviewer nodded. Adaeze stared at the screen. Ontario's largest independently owned greenhouse operation. 28 new permanent jobs. A commercial account. The kind of commercial account that was the professional equivalent of a landmark for a small credit union like Northern Harvest. Gone. Because she had looked at his boots and decided, before he had finished his second sentence, what kind of man he was. She set the bowl down. She sat with her hands in her lap. The news moved on. Something about weather. Something about a road closure on Highway 26. And she sat there for a long time after it had moved on, looking at the wall. She thought about the way she had said significant process. She heard it back, the way you hear things back when the context has changed. The same words, completely different shape. She had meant to sound professional. She heard now exactly how she had sounded. She thought about Zara saying her name. Just her name, nothing else. The way one word could be a whole sentence. She thought about the nod Mr. Kofi had given her on his way out. Not cold, just a nod. The kind you give when someone has shown you exactly who they are and you have decided to leave them there. She did not sleep well that night. The next morning she was at her desk at 8:47 a.m., earlier than usual. Zara arrived at 9 and said good morning in her ordinary way and went to make coffee. The branch opened at 9:30. The first few members of the day came and went. At 10:15 the branch manager called Adaeze into his office. His name was Mr. Callahan. He was a solid, fair-minded man in his late 50s who had worked in credit union management for most of his adult life. He did not have a dramatic personality. He communicated in plain sentences and expected the same in return. He gestured for Adaeze to close the door. She did. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He folded his hands on his desk. He looked at her the way he always looked at difficult things, directly, without build-up. "I want to talk to you about a member interaction from 2 weeks ago," he said. "A Mr. Asant-Mensah. Do you remember the visit?" Adaeze felt something move through her chest. "Yes," she said. "He came in to inquire about a commercial account. Yes, he left without one. He has since taken his personal accounts and the commercial account, which would have been worth quite a lot to us, to a different institution." Mr. Callahan paused. "He wrote us a letter, not an angry letter, a very measured, specific letter, explaining why." Adaeze looked at her hands. "He described being told that the process was probably not for him," Mr. Callahan said, "before you had looked at his file, before you had asked his name, before you had any information at all." Adaeze did not say anything. "I've also spoken with Zara," Mr. Callahan said, "and with Brendan." The room was quiet. Outside the office window, the branch carried on. The sound of the door, a phone, a printer. "I've worked in this industry for 30 years, Mr. Callahan said, and the thing I've learned is that this kind of mistake, and I'm calling it a mistake because I believe it can be corrected, doesn't usually come from malice. It comes from assumption, but the effect of assumption is the same as malice, from the member's perspective. You understand that?" It was not a question. "Yes," Adaeze said. Her voice came out smaller than she expected. "I'm not going to terminate your employment," Mr. Callahan said, "but I'm placing a formal note in your file. You'll be required to complete our member equity training, the full session, not the abbreviated one. And I'm going to ask you to reflect seriously on what happened here, because this cannot happen again." He said it without heat. That was almost harder than heat would have been. "Do you have anything you'd like to say?" he said. Adaeze thought about what she could say. She thought about the explanation she had assembled on the drive over. She had been having a slow day. She hadn't meant it the way it sounded. She was simply being realistic about the requirements. All of it had seemed reasonable in the car. None of it seemed reasonable now. "No," she said. "I don't have anything to say. You're right, Mr." Callahan looked at her for a moment longer, the way a person looks when they are trying to determine whether something is true. Then he nodded. "Okay," he said. "That's all." She walked back to her desk. Zara was with a member explaining something, her voice low and engaged. She did not look up when Adaeze sat down. Adaeze opened her computer. She stared at the home screen for a moment. Then she opened Mr. Asant-Mensah's file. She should have opened it 2 weeks ago, before she said a single word, and she read it. 22 years of membership. No missed payments. No flags. The account balance in his personal savings alone was not the balance of a man who was just starting out. And that was before the business. She read the account history slowly, line by line. 22 years of a man who had shown up, quietly, consistently, and been a member of this institution longer than she had been working in any institution at all. She sat with that. At lunch, she ate at her desk instead of going to the break room. Not because she was ashamed, or not only because of that, because she needed to sit with something uncomfortable without anyone else's company, without conversation, without the small social movements that would have let her off the hook of her own attention. She thought about what she had actually seen when Mr. Kofi walked in. muddy boots, a quilted vest, a wool cap. She had assembled a story in about 4 seconds and then treated that story as fact. And the fact was that she had been wrong. Not just about his finances, not just about his business, but about something more foundational. She had decided who he was before he opened his mouth, and that was a thing she could not fully explain away, not even to herself. She thought about Zara. 7 years. Never made a member feel small. The way she had said Adaeze's name, not with cruelty, but with a kind of quiet refusal to pretend she hadn't seen what she'd seen. Adaeze thought about whether she would have had that kind of courage, if the positions had been reversed, if she had been the one watching from the next desk. She was not sure she would have. That was the hardest part of the afternoon. 3 weeks later, Adaeze completed the member equity training. It was not the abbreviated version. It was 6 hours, spread across 2 days, and there were parts of it that made her uncomfortable in a way that was not the same as shame, more like recognition. The recognition of seeing your own patterns named and described by someone who has never met you. She did not feel sorry for herself during the training. She was done feeling sorry for herself. That had lasted about 48 hours after the meeting with Mr. Callahan, and then she had realized that feeling sorry for herself was just another way of making the story about her, which was exactly the problem in the first place. There was a Friday in December, the last Friday before the holiday break, when Zara brought in jollof rice and left it in the break room with the handwritten note, same as always. Adaeze got there before it was gone and took a small plate and stood by the window, eating it while the parking lot outside filled with snow. Zara came in to get coffee. "This is really good," Adaeze said. Zara looked at her. "My grandmother's recipe," she said. "She would have been very angry if she knew I was feeding it to people who didn't appreciate it." There was a beat of silence, and then, carefully, quietly, they both laughed. Not a long laugh. Not the laugh of people who had forgotten what had happened. The laugh of 2 people who were choosing to be in this room going forward, and both of them knowing what that choice meant. "I was wrong," Adaeze said. "It came out simply because there was no other shape for it. What I did to that man, I was wrong." Zara nodded. She did not say it was fine, because it was not fine. She did not say she had already forgotten it, because she had not. She just nodded, the way you nod at something true. "I know," Zara said. They stood there for another moment by the window, the snow falling outside in the easy, indifferent way that snow falls over everything, over the clean things and the complicated things, over the things you wish you had done differently, and the small beginnings of doing better. Then Zara picked up her coffee and went back to her desk. Adaeze finished her rice. She rinsed her plate, set it on the drying rack, and went back to work.